I'll get started when I see the red on-air light. All right, welcome everyone. I'm Councilmember Zach Hall, and I'm calling the May 6, 2025 City Council Planning, Development, and Environment Committee to order at 6:30 p.m. I'm joined by Council President Walsh and Councilmember Jang. Really quickly to run through the agenda, we have public comment and approval of minutes, and then our only agenda item is COM 0124, the Capital Improvement Plan. So the first item on our agenda is public comment. I don't see any members of the public in the audience here in the room with us, but I'll check in with the clerk to see if there's any members of the public online.
Chair Hall, no one has signed up prior to the meeting to speak, and there are no members of the public online.
All right, then we will move on past public comment, but we do have another opportunity for public comment after the presentation from staff and council question and answer. So if you're tuning in on YouTube and can't wait to join us later in the meeting, we will have another opportunity for you to comment. The next item on our agenda is approval of the April 1st, 2025 meeting minutes, which were distributed in advance. I did have a correction to the minutes. I'm not sure if committee members saw this, but I would wanted to propose the following changes to add that the committee agreed with staff and PPC recommendations to remove the word temporary from exempt frontage improvements for middle housing temporarily, and change match existing frontage use for future infill to consider matching existing frontage use for future infill as council discusses street standards updates. And I just thought that meant that captured our conversation a bit more. Any objections to making those changes? Okay. Any objections to approving by unanimous consent to the minutes? All right, then hearing none, the April 1st, 2025 meeting minutes are approved as corrected. The next item on our agenda is COM 0124, the Capital Improvement Plan, brought to us by our very own Deputy City Administrator, Andrea Snyder. So, Andrea, take it away.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. I am Andrea Snyder, and with me I have a whole team of people who have helped shape the stormwater section of the CIP and a few other sections as well. They are here to help present and answer any questions that you might have. I wanted to first talk about the capital improvement plan and the years and the changes of the years. So 2027 through 2032, it is only 2025 right now. The reason why we have shifted the capital improvement plan years to really skip 2026 in this instance is because we wanted to better align it with the budget years. So moving from an annual budget to a biennial budget, Council just adopted the 2025 to 2026 budget. So we wanted to better align the capital improvement plan with the budget cycle and not have a capital improvement plan that only captured half of the budget cycle. It's a bit awkward and also redundant since those budget decisions were already made by Council. So that's why we shifted it back a year to cover 2027 through 2032. What that means is we're looking farther into the time horizon than what we have typically done in a CIP. But in the future, this will just make more sense as it's better aligned with our biennial budget. So the purpose of this evening is to review our 2-year update to the CIP, specifically on stormwater. That's what the task of this committee is. We've talked a little bit about what that budget process, the capital improvement plan process is going to be. Tonight we're focused on stormwater. Next week is mobility and infrastructure, looking at transportation and other utilities. Then safety services and parks will cover parks, facilities, and IT. And then all of council will get together at the committee of the whole in the beginning of June to cover all topics of the CIP together. But tonight we're really just focused on stormwater. We also want to ask for feedback on what council's priorities in stormwater may be. Direction needed tonight is whether council has feedback on the proposed stormwater projects. And one of the things we want to refer back to is we had a previous conversation with council at a previous committee of the whole talking about the utility rate study and stormwater specifically. We have been concerned about increasing utility rates and the cost of living in the city of Issaquah and how those utility rates contribute to the cost of living for our residents and businesses. And so previous direction that we'd received from council is to try to smooth out those utility rate increases, focus on priorities of what are the urgent things that we must do in order to properly provide for that stormwater utility, clean the stormwater according to state regulations, et cetera. What that means is some projects that maybe had more of an emphasis on habitat restoration related to stormwater projects, maybe those have been pushed out, delayed, or scaled back in order to make sure that we're keeping the rates for our stormwater utility more reasonable. And so that's direction that we had previously received from council. What you're seeing in this CIP reflects that direction. Director Emily Moon in Public Works is going to speak to that a little bit more later, but I wanted to make sure that that was upfront for your awareness as we look at some of these projects. Like I said, June 16th, that committee of the whole will consider all the sections of the CIP together. Tonight, we're just focusing on that stormwater element. So let's take a little step back and talk about what a CIP is. We have this conversation every time because it's a really important conversation. The CIP is a planning document. It is not a budget. And so a planning document, it helps outline for those 6 years of the CIP, what are the projects that we plan reasonably to be able to get done. We take components of our various infrastructure plans, and the CIP is where we plan on how we're going to put all these projects together and accomplish that entire capital, all those capital investments in the next 6 years. The CIP is also an element of the city's comprehensive plan, and it includes the annual Transportation Improvement Program. State law requires us to update the Transportation Improvement Program on an annual basis, and that is one component of the CIP. The CIP also, by state law, must include how projects may be funded, our best guesses at this point for what types of revenues would be used and how we would fund these projects. And because it is a planning document, we know that it is subject to change. It's hard to look out to 2032. It's in some areas, it's hard to know what type of funding will be there in 2 years, let alone in 5 or 6. So it is subject to change as a planning document. We do update it every 2 years, and it is not a budget. So what that means is a budget has to be balanced between revenues and expenditures. The CIP does not have to be balanced. In fact, it's our typical practice that, especially in the later years of the CIP, that we know that we have some areas where we expect expenditures to be greater than the revenues we anticipate having available. That's in part because forecasting that far ahead is very difficult. To forecast our revenues several years in advance, to forecast exactly what a project's going to look like, what other pressures there may be on those revenue sources like the general fund that we have to balance out in those future years. It's very difficult to do that. So what you're going to see in this CIP is it is very much a planning document, and there are some things that are very difficult to plan this year, even more than previous years, with the uncertainties of the economy, with uncertainties of some of our revenue sources that we have. And so it is not meant to be exact in terms of how we anticipate revenues will cover expenditures. The budget is supposed to be balanced, and so that is the big difference between the CIP and the budget. What is unique about this CIP compared to previous CIPs that we've done is we know that we have some imbalance even in the first 2 years of the CIP. So we know that there are some projects and that with the funding sources that we have now, if they were to behave as we predict, we may not be able to fund, or we could only partially fund. That is a couple of years from now. And so we have opportunities to be able to correct that as we look at the next biennial budget process. So this slide covers some of those things that I mentioned. Overall, some of the themes with this CIP is that the needs continue to outpace our revenues, particularly in the case of the general fund and REIT. During the budget season, we talked a lot about the pressures on the general fund, some of the concerns we have with the revenues going into the general fund. We use some of the general fund to cover our capital costs. And so as there are increased need from general fund revenues to cover our operating costs, that's competing for funds that can go into our capital program as well. So more competition for general fund revenues, and also real estate excise tax. That's what REIT means on this slide. We know that REIT is also very difficult to predict. In a city of our size, if a large building gets sold, that's more revenue than what maybe we had predicted. And so any one building sale or purchase could really change the REIT revenues that we receive. So we look at, on average, how much do we receive over the years, but those amounts are very much subject to change. So we're looking at more competition for general fund and REIT. Those are the areas that are hard for us to cover some of our capital costs, while also we're anticipating fewer grants from the federal government and possibly from the state government as well. And that's something that, again, is very hard to predict as we look out to the next 6 years of the CIP. That uncertain future, as I've said, makes planning very difficult. Less difficult, though, in the areas of utilities. And since stormwater is our focus tonight, we have more predictability in our utilities. We know what our utility plans are in terms of infrastructure. That's what we're talking about tonight. We know how much it costs to operate that utility, and we control all of the revenues for that utility through our rates. So for stormwater, that process is pretty predictable as we try to plan our stormwater needs compared to, let's say, transportation or parks. Also, this CIP, we have really prioritized maintenance. We've heard direction from council in previous years that the desire is to focus on maintaining what we have over building something new, and that's really important. So as we looked at these projects, weighed their criteria, we really wanted to emphasize maintenance over new projects as we try to identify funds to pay for all of these needs. In particular, facilities maintenance, we're not going to be talking about that tonight, but I think it's important that council understands that facility maintenance continues to be an urgent need. We have kicked the can down the road for a long time on our facilities. In the past few years, we've worked really hard to get the right staff managing our facilities, understanding what those needs are, especially in maintenance, and then trying to budget and plan accordingly for that maintenance. We're continuing on that path with this CIP. There's a lot of urgent needs that we feel cannot be delayed when it comes to our facilities. And then also another theme for this CIP, which we will be talking about tonight, we have additions to this CIP. They capture the latest in the utility rate study. That utility rate study is happening on a parallel process with council. So the utility rate study, Director Moon is going to be presenting on that at the Mobility and Infrastructure meeting next week. But everything in the CIP reflects what's within that utility rate study. So we're having these conversations in parallel with each other.
Can I ask a quick question on this slide? So there were some changes at the state legislature this year around REIT, between REIT 1 and REIT 2, and kind of flexibility in terms of use and ability to use on operations or maintenance. Has that changed at all in terms of how we're planning long-term in the CIP for use?
It didn't really change this year because we were putting this all together while some of those changes were being made at the state level. It's great that there's more flexibility in REIT. The more flexible our funding sources are, fantastic, because then we can be able to use them according to what our needs are. So in some ways, we could apply REIT more to some of this maintenance, but we already have so many significant needs for REIT for replacing certain types of equipment or actually just doing the construction and projects. So it hasn't changed a lot for us with this CIP, but it's something that we're going to be looking for more in the future. Great. Next, I would like to bring up Jillian Straub, Management Analyst, who did a lot of the work in pulling this CIP together.
All right, so as Andrea has mentioned, needs outpace the revenue sources we have available for the first 2 years of the CIP, so a little bit different from our previous practice of presenting a balanced CIP. For the first 2 years, we have some gaps, and we'll talk specifically about where those gaps are in a few slides. However, in order to make it a somewhat realistic and usable plan, we have tried to reduce those gaps and shift funding where possible. So departments have already looked at reducing the scope of projects, phasing them, or moving them entirely to out years in the CIP, moving to more funding stable sources from those that are overtapped, and prioritizing maintenance over new assets in order to get closer to balanced in 27 and 28. So there are a few. This chart includes most of the major revenue sources in the CIP. We'll talk specifically about general fund and REIT as some of those overtapped sources in a moment, but I want to call out mitigation funds, the utility funds, and City Hall IPD funding source here. So this CIP plans for mitigation funds, most of them to be drawn down to zero as is possible through the projects. So this will have ongoing impacts on future CIPs and those funds being less available in the future. The utility funds, as Andrea mentioned, are really derived through the utility rate process, and so their capital support is synced up there. And then the City Hall IPD funding source is noted here, but this is also subject to a parallel process with the mayor's task force, which is determining scope, which will inform the cost estimates and timing of those projects. So we've noted it here, knowing that we have large needs, but we haven't really identified what that funding source is going to be at this point, but we wanted to call it out in our planning document. So now to talk a little bit about REIT and the general fund. So you can see here, the first line in the table for REIT displays the amount of capital project support that was requested even after reducing projects, pushing them out, and then compares that to the ending fund balance. And as you can see, we're overtapped in REIT at the very beginning of the CIP. The general fund is a little bit different. So the general fund historically has contributed around $900,000 to capital projects, with the majority of its expenses being operating. So we sought to match that historical $900,000 of capital support, but as you can see, we're still over-requested or over-tapped compared to our historical average, and that'll be addressed through future operating budgets. And there's that push and pull with operating expenses and capital project support that was noted. So this displays the distribution of projects across different asset categories. You can see that most projects are concentrated in municipal facilities and transportation, as is not surprising or different from previous years. I'll also point out that we totaled the cost of projects for 2027 through 2032 and compared that to where we have identified funding sources, so going back to that balancing question. And over the course of the CIP, we do have some significant unidentified funding sources, as you can see in that last column, are significant revenue needs, with that municipal facilities number largely being driven by the City Hall IPD funding source gap that we talked about. And with that, I'll hand it over to Director Moon to talk a little bit more about the stormwater projects in the CIP.
Good evening, Emily Moon, Public Works Director. I wanted to just summarize what we talked about in the Committee of the Whole meeting and tell you where we are now. I think it's a good picture. So previously, when we spoke to you about the utility rate study and we described the needs of each particular fund in terms of operating expenses and revenues and capital expenses and revenues, for the stormwater fund, we had a complex picture, not entirely rosy picture, where we were not able to cover both the full operating expenses nor the full capital expenses. And at that time, our rate projections were along these lines: 6 1/4 to fund only the operating, no capital projects, 16 3/4 to fund the whole shebang, and about 10% at that time if we scaled back the number of capital projects that we were funding. And just for shorthand, we call them critical capital projects, but really what we did is we looked at which projects had defined revenue sources, anticipated, could sort of count on revenue sources, which projects really needed to be near term, they were more urgent, which projects we could divide up into more phases to spread them out over time and therefore smooth the rate increase. And so after we did that, and after we corrected a couple of things that we found on the operating side and on the capital side, we were able to get the stormwater fund down to a 6.25% rate increase to cover operating and that sort of reduced capital list that we had discussed with Committee of the Whole. So that's really good news, not 10%, 6.25%. The number of projects, the types of projects, our pathway to that 6.25% doesn't really differ from what we told you at Committee of the Whole. It's just that we were able to refine some numbers and correct some issues. So that's good news. And as I just spoke about, the way that we got our capital improvement program in line with what we are ultimately going to propose on the rate structure is by reprioritizing to a certain extent repair and replacement projects, those that had regulatory requirements, those critical projects. We looked at projects that perhaps we could take a little bit more time with when we delayed those, or we looked at the assumptions around grants, and if they weren't certain, we adjusted timetables for those. And then, as I said, we broke projects up to some degree, and we're able to smooth that rate increase. So with that, I'm going to ask Matt Ellis, our Utilities Engineering Manager, to come up, and he's going to get into specific projects.
Bringing my notes, forgive me. Okay, so we did do a bit of shuffling, as Emily Moon and Andrea mentioned. Some new projects that we added to the CIP were mainly bridge projects. That's an analysis and permitting for the Tibbetts Manor Bridge. That project is mainly to reduce flooding around the manor and repair or remove bridges that are out of date. Really, that project will ultimately go to Parks for construction as they evaluate and complete the final design for Tibbetts Valley Park. We're just supporting through the permitting phases. And then the other one is more of a program, and that's our bridge scour repair. So we've got a number of bridges within the city because we have a number of streams. And a lot of the smaller bridges have some scour where the stream has moved and impacted the abutments of the bridge. We've got trees that are growing underneath the bridge that need to be removed. Things like that need to be an annual program to remove or repair or fix infrastructure. So that's the main impact for new CIP projects. As we looked at the CIP in alignment with our utility rate study, and just looking at projects holistically of what is needed, what are projects that may not be as necessary after we've looked at them for a number of years, we cut a few projects. The Cabin Creek Tributary Stabilization and Enhancement, that's been going on for 20 years. And we had a geotechnical expert go out and we looked at it. The area is stable. We'll continue to monitor it and we can always put it back on the CIP in the future. But under our current evaluation, it's a non-needed project at the moment. The Central Park Bioswale, similar. We can utilize our stormwater rehabilitation project, which is our annual program for repair, to fix that project if we deem it necessary. But we do have higher needs for repair in our city, assets that are degrading at a higher rate. And we didn't want to utilize funds towards this project and take them away from higher needed projects. And then the West Village Creek Sediment Pond Removal and Restoration Project, that project is tied to the Washdot Fish Passage work. And as they evaluated their project, they had to eliminate parts of their scope. And unfortunately, this project is upstream of one of those areas that they eliminated from their scope, and we can't do this project unless their portion that they were supposed to do was completed first. So if that goes on in the future, we can always add the West Village Creek sediment pond removal, but unless they remove their portion, this project is not useful for a future CIP or current CIP.
Can I ask a quick question about, so remove projects, how do we track those, whereas, in the future, we might want to do it, but it just doesn't fit right now? Like, is there value in adding it to the future project list in the back, or do we have some sort of internal system where we keep track of these?
We have an internal system, so we keep track of all our old CIP projects. We also have spreadsheet upon spreadsheet of all our projects
sure
that
you
we've
do,
got
yeah.
for years, so we do keep track of those. One project we did increase, and that was our storm drain rehab project. And again, as I said, that is mainly dealing with repairing degraded assets. We've got a lot of corrugated metal pipes within the city, which don't last forever, and a lot of them are rusting out. So that project is really going to focus, instead of on, it used to focus on small flooding issues within the city, but we're really going to start focusing on repairing and replacing aging infrastructure with that project. And so we've increased the amount in the coming years so we can really focus on that effort. And then, as Emily and Andrea mentioned, we've got some projects that have delayed, pushed out, and broken into phases. The East Lake Sam Parkway Conveyance Project, it's a rather large project where we've got some small pipes that go across East Lake Sandwich Parkway towards a ditch between 51st and the boat ramp. And that project is just too large as one project. It would really hit our reserves there, so we decided to spread it out and put it out into a longer period as we complete the assets. The Laughing Jacobs Creek Channel Enhancement Project, that is primarily funded through grants. We actually have quite a bit of grant funding to support that project at the moment. So that was just pushed out due to permitting and to ensure that we get grant funding for the construction phase. Squaw Valley Park, that project actually we were going to push out. However, we just received a rather large grant for that, so that might, after we developed the CIP, things changed very quickly with the planning document, and that one we did receive some, a good grant, or at least a commitment for a grant, that we might push it forward because it's a pretty exciting project. And then the water quality low impact development retrofits, that has 3 elements to it. We're still constructing 2 elements within the city, but as we developed the grant for that project, we didn't realize the amount of infrastructure we needed to repair, and we didn't receive the funding we needed to do all the projects that we had identified. So one of the larger retrofit areas we've pushed to the out year in the hopes that we can get and secure additional funding. And then the Issaquah Highlands West 45 Stormwater Lift Station Rehab Project, we just pushed that project out. It's a needed project, but not a high priority compared to other needs within the city. The Sunrise Place Sycamore to Drive Emergency Access Stabilization and Culvert Replacement, which is a mouthful. That project, we realize, needs fish passage. It is a needed project, but it is a useful project for grants, so that's one that we're really focusing on grant funding to support us. We are still, we're doing the design right now, and we're also applying for grants for it. And so that's one of those projects where, as we go through the phases of evaluation, design, and construction, we'll go through as we get the grant funding to support. And when we get to the end of that, if we don't get grants, we can table it until we get those grants. But we'll continue to be proactive in that grant applications. The Pickering Ditch Flood Control Project is a challenging project, and that one is mainly dealing with beavers within the city. And we're still trying to figure out the permitting and what we can really do. So that's a continued project, but it's just been delayed due to the challenges. And then the Fish Passage Culvert Replacement Program, that is a program we wanted to do every 5 years to replace one culvert within the city. So it's not a requirement or an obligation, but it's something that we want to do because it is important to support fish habitat and the environment. However, we do have the Laughing Jacobs Creek channel replacement, which is a culvert project, already on the books, already funded through design. So we decided to push that out. So we stagger it, and then we can really focus on the grant application when we get closer to that design timeline. That is our projects. Is there any questions?
Yeah, I might ask, unless anyone else has questions first. Can you walk us through, again, kind of the logic around the fish culvert projects one? So if we're waiting, it's going to be, for some of them, you said they would be funded by grants, and they might even be strong applicants for receiving grant funding. If that's the case, why wouldn't we necessarily plan for that grant dollar in a certain year within this time frame and keep it in the CIP? So can you walk us through why that's removed again?
So it's still in the CIP. We just pushed it out a few years. Again, that's partly for
That's my fault. I misread it says delayed.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Timing and next steps. We have our committee meeting tonight. This kicks off the CIP discussions with City Council. Next week, we have mobility and infrastructure, which is going to cover transportation and the other two utilities. And then safety services and parks on May 20th. That they will focus on, of course, parks, facilities, and also IT capital needs. Then, as I said before, we're going to come together for the Committee of the Whole on June 16th to talk about all of these elements together and look at all of those policy questions that each committee dove into on an individual basis, and with potential adoption June 23rd. So, direction needed for this evening is, does council have any feedback on the proposed stormwater projects?
Great. Well, thank you all for being here with us and walking us through that, and clearly the very intentional work that went into this before, or since the last Committee of the Whole. Any questions from the committee for staff? Okay. Maybe a couple kind of high-level ones. So the ethos behind this, as defined by our council conversation at the Committee of the Whole, was delaying some things, focusing on critical infrastructure and operations to help smooth out rates and being mindful of all that. Should we just assume that, I mean, this is an intentional policy decision. Should we assume that one of the long-term consequences are going to be that these projects are going to cost more in the future? Is that kind of one of the things that we have to acknowledge as making this short-term important decision that we need to? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, typically project costs only increase as the years go on. That said, who knows what the future looks like, right? You've already heard that we were successful in getting a grant since the time that we started drafting the CIP, what feels like a few short weeks ago. So it's through the next 6 years or beyond, what grants become available, what grants don't become available, we're always going to be on the lookout for those grants. So if there are projects that qualify well for grants, that we have the staffing capacity to do, we're going to pursue those projects. And some projects may be prioritized and bumped up ahead because we're able to get funding for those projects. So I think, the other thing that we like to do is look for opportunities where we can coordinate projects. So if there is an opportunity we're doing one type of work, maybe we can fold in some additional bank stabilization or whatever that looks like. I'm just throwing out examples there. So we always look for these opportunities to achieve the projects as efficiently as we can with the public dollar.
Thank you very much. And then last question is just a fun one, and I promise only picture. Are there no pictures this year in the CIP? Really helps visualize what exactly is this pipe that we're investing in?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, this has been a pared down CIP, and the reason for that is we have been down staff. So as you may recall, we don't have an official finance director yet. We are working on that. So we have our deputy finance director pulling double duty. We also don't have a budget analyst. Right now, we're in recruitment for that position. So it has been just Susie, and she is allowed to go on vacation sometimes. So it was really a staffing capacity issue. It's just trying to make sure that we still deliver on the CIP, but what parts can we cut out given that we are in a staffing shortage, especially in finance.
Makes perfect sense. I'll get a hold of myself. All right, if there aren't any other go ahead.
So given that this CIP is 2027 to 32, is the goal to approve that now, and then, as things change even next year, would we come up with a new version of the 27 to 32 CIP?
So a portion of that CIP, which is the Transportation Improvement Program, we update on an annual basis. So for that portion, yes, we would be able to make updates next year. Otherwise, typically, we're on a 2-year schedule. So we wouldn't look at this, it's 2025 now, we wouldn't look at it again until 2027 for those updates. And at that point, we should have better information about budget and revenues, et cetera.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess it just does feel a little bit weird to be, going that far out for like a 6-year plan, right? Because we still have, over a year and a half until the start of this plan, and especially as things are changing, I wonder, maybe it doesn't make sense to do this at this point, but in the future, maybe, if we're doing a plan for 2027 to 32, would it make sense to go over that in detail in 2026 so we have a clear picture of the budget, or?
Yes, so we will be better synced up in future years. This is one of those odd years where we're trying to get on a better schedule to have our budget and our CIP better in alignment with the timeline. The other thing to note is that we still adopt budgets and we make adjustments to those budgets on an annual basis or sometimes more than annual basis. And so if these opportunities arise, like accepting a grant for a project, we can make those adjustments to the budget to operationalize the plan. And so it is just a plan, plans change, budget is a little bit more nimble, and certainly that's where the implementation happens. So we still have that flexibility if these opportunities arise.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Those are our questions. So now we'll move on to public comment. There are still no members of the public in the audience with us today. I'll check in with the clerk to see if there are any members of the public online.
We do have a member of the public in attendance, Chair, but I don't see any virtual hands raised at this time.
Well, and now that I know a member of the public is on, I didn't read some of the intro comments before, so I'll do that now just in case they'd like to raise their hands. So there were multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. Right now, we're taking public comment on this particular item. If you are joining us virtually, which you must be because there's no one in here, and you're on your phone, press *3, or if you're on your computer or smartphone, look for the hand icon, and that varies by device, but one option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right-hand corner. And I'm just going to wait a moment now to see if you have any interest in providing any public comment for us tonight. All right. Well, thank you very much for being with us, though. And of course, you can write council whenever you'd like at citycouncil@issaquah.gov. We read emails and get back to people and take that feedback very seriously. So again, thank you for being with us. All right, with that, we're going to go into deliberation by the committee. So any feedback on proposed stormwater projects? Yeah.
So thank you for this. I know this is a very odd year. I know we are looking at lots of revenue situations, lots of staffing situations, as you mentioned, and concerns about grants and capital projects. So that's definitely on my mind. I can see how you've been responsive to that, and so I appreciate that. I think in particular, when we're talking about the stormwater projects, this was particularly responsive to the committee of the whole feedback. And so I could see that very clearly. That came across. Matt, I really appreciate your explanations during this meeting about why projects were delayed or not, or eliminated from that. I had come into this with a little bit of concern going, hey, why are we eliminating projects? Maybe just push them to the out years. But that particularly clears it up on, hey, these are either things that we no longer find are needed because we've figured out that it's already been handled, or we might look at it in a future year, but we have projects listed. I think I very much agree with the approach of focusing on and increasing our maintenance of our assets. And so across the board, I see that here in the stormwater section. I particularly like seeing the bridge maintenance and the scouring. So I appreciate that that has been added and a willing add to the list. The only other area of feedback, highlighting kind of one of the questions that Councilmember Hall brought up earlier, is I understand in these cases why things were eliminated. In other situations, and I haven't looked over the whole CIP for things that were eliminated, but if they are, and it makes sense that it's still a project we would want to do, I want to make sure that that gets into the appendix or the future years so that we as council can keep track of it, not just a staff listing somewhere there. But in these cases on stormwater, I understand why they wouldn't be added to that list, so I have no concerns there. So, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, thanks. I know it's a lot of work to put this together, especially given all the uncertainty going on. I was very happy to see that the stormwater, given the update in the rate forecast, we don't have to go to 10% increase per year to get, the critical capital and operating improvement. So that's super exciting for us to see. And generally, I really agree with the emphasis on, maintaining what we do have, just because if you don't maintain what you have, then it could blow up and be 10 times more expensive in 20 years. So definitely agree with, past councils that have proposed that approach. And yeah, thanks for putting this together. I agree that, this seems like the right prioritization. And it seems like even though, we are emphasizing maintenance, there are, still a number of new projects and restorations that we're undertaking, which is also, always exciting. So thank you.
Well, this is the fantastic thing about being a chair to a wonderful committee is nothing else additional add. That was captured very well, except just really a deep appreciation to staff for turning 10% into 6.25%. That is huge, right, for working families here who are stretching every dollar they earn over the next year. So really big thank you for that. And I think you've listened to our feedback very well, and I look forward to seeing what the future committees think of the CIP. Have you got everything you need?
We do. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Great. Then the next item on the agenda is announcements. Are there any announcements by the committee or anyone on staff? Then I will just say that our next meeting is scheduled for June 10th, and the preliminary agenda includes COM 018 2025 Title 18 policy amendments and COM 0109 the Title 18 tree code update. So it is Title 18 night next month. There being no further business, we are adjourned at 7:13 p.m.